Shy Intern accidentally sat at the VIP table. Unaware the black man she complained about was the CEO sitting beside her. "I'm sorry, you can't sit here." The biting cold of the November evening seemed to seep through the very walls of Alara Vance's tiny apartment, a persistent, unwelcome guest that settled deep in her bones. Rain hammered against the single pane of glass in her window, a relentless drumming that echoed the frantic thudding in her own chest as she stared at the pile of red-stamped envelopes on her small, wobbly table. Each one was a stark reminder of her mother's long, slow decline, a battle fought with love and lost to medicine's cruel arithmetic, leaving Alara with nothing but a hollow ache and a mountain of unbearable debt. She pulled her threadbare cardigan tighter around her shoulders, the worn fabric doing little to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the cold of absolute solitude. Her gaze fell upon the small, silver locket resting beside the bills, its surface gleaming softly in the flickering light of her only lamp. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph of her mother, smiling, her eyes full of a light that had long since been extinguished. It was her most sacred treasure, a tangible piece of a love that felt like a distant dream. She was drowning, quietly and with a dignified despair that allowed no room for tears. She had to be strong. By day, she was an unpaid intern at Sterling Designs, one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the world, a place of gleaming marble floors and sterile silence where she felt utterly invisible. She would fetch coffee and sort blueprints, her own prodigious talent confined to a worn sketchbook she kept hidden in her bag. Her designs were not for the sleek, cold skyscrapers the firm was famous for. They were for homes, for community centers, for places with heart. Beatrice Croft, a senior manager with eyes as sharp and cold as shards of glass, seemed to take a special, cruel pleasure in reminding Alara of her insignificance, her voice always dripping with a barely concealed impatience. Beatrice would assign her the most menial tasks, her words a constant, subtle humiliation. Yet Alara persisted with a quiet resolve, fueled by a fragile, desperate hope that her work, her pure passion, would one day be seen. She didn't know it yet, but a single evening was about to shatter her world, only to rebuild it into something more beautiful than she could ever have imagined. It was the night of the annual Sterling Gala, a night that would change everything. She was there to work, to disappear into the background. But fate, in its mysterious way, had other plans. A clumsy waiter, a spilled tray of crimson wine, and her simple, black work uniform was ruined. Mortified, she rushed to the staff bathroom and changed into the only other thing she had. A simple, second-hand navy dress she'd bought for a funeral 2 years ago. It was modest and out of place amidst the glittering gowns and crisp tuxedos that filled the cavernous ballroom. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of powerful conversations, making her feel smaller and more invisible than ever. Overwhelmed, seeking just a moment of quiet refuge, she spotted a small, round table tucked away in a dimly lit alcove, partially obscured by a large potted palm. It appeared empty. With a trembling sigh of relief, she sank into one of the plush velvet chairs, the soft fabric a world away from her reality. She closed her eyes. For a moment, a soft cough broke the silence. Alara's eyes snapped open. A man was sitting across from her, a figure she hadn't noticed in the deep shadows. He wasn't dressed like the other guests. His suit was simple, dark, and well-worn, not impeccably tailored. His face, etched with lines of a profound weariness, was gaunt, and his eyes held a haunted, distant look as if he were seeing ghosts in the glittering crowd. He looked as out of place as she felt. This was Julian Sterling, the enigmatic CEO and founder of Sterling Designs. A man who had retreated from the world after a seismic tragedy years ago had splintered his soul. His wife and young daughter, gone in the space of a single, shattering heartbeat. Now he existed in a state of sterile silence, his work his only refuge, his heart a hollow, locked room. He attended these galas out of obligation, always in disguise, to observe his own creation from the outside, his cynicism a protective shield. He saw the flash of panic in the young woman's eyes and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent permission for her to stay. He assumed she was the guest of some junior executive, dragged along to an event she clearly found intimidating. Her presence was an unexpected, minor curiosity in an evening of crushing monotony. He had no idea he was about to be saved. He saw her shiver, a slight tremble in her shoulders. The kindness that defined her, the selfless instinct that was the very core of her being, took over. She pushed the small bread basket in the center of the table toward him. "You should have one," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They're still warm." It helps. He looked from the basket to her sincere, gentle face. It was such a small gesture, a simple offering of warmth from one stranger to another. But in his transactional world of calculated favors and networking, this unsolicited act of pure, innocent kindness struck him with the force of a physical blow. A forgotten door in his heart creaked open just a crack. He froze. Julian simply stared at the bread basket, then at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his haunted eyes. He took a roll, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting second, and a jolt of unexpected warmth passed between them, a silent acknowledgement in the noisy, cavernous hall. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice raspy, as if unused. The sincerity of her small offering disarmed him entirely, piercing through the heavy fog of his grief and cynicism. He saw not an intern or an employee, but a person of quiet, dignified grace who possessed a purity he thought no longer existed. For the first time in years, he felt a genuine flicker of intrigue. "You don't seem to be enjoying the party," he observed, his tone gentle. Elara gave a small, self-deprecating smile, feeling a strange sense of ease with this weary-looking stranger. She felt he was a kindred spirit, another soul adrift in this sea of polished opulence. "Is it that obvious?" she whispered, glancing around at the gleaming chandeliers and the sea of confident, smiling faces. "I don't really belong here. I work here." And in turn, she said the word like an apology. She then gestured vaguely at the grand room, at the architecture that was both stunning and, to her, strangely cold. "It's beautiful, of course. Sterling designs are always technically perfect." There was a but hanging in the air, unspoken but potent. Julian leaned forward slightly, his attention now fully captured. "But," he prompted, his voice a low rumble. He had designed this very ballroom himself years ago when his heart was still whole. He had thought it was his masterpiece. The words tumbled out of Elara in a soft, passionate rush, a confession she would never dare make to anyone at the firm. "But it feels soulless," she said, her voice raw with a sincerity that was breathtaking. "It's architecture that's meant to be looked at, not lived in. It's commanding, but it isn't welcoming. It's like they've forgotten that buildings are supposed to hold people, their hopes and their memories. They've forgotten the heart." She spoke not of quarterly reports or client demands, but of the very philosophy he had built his company on, a philosophy he himself had lost. She was articulating the exact, gnawing emptiness he felt every time he walked through one of his own creations. She was giving voice to the ghost of the man he used to be. A seismic shock went through him. It was as if she had reached directly into his chest and touched his most sacred, long-buried wound. He saw her shiver again, this time more noticeably. Without a second thought, he shrugged off his own suit jacket, the simple, worn blazer, and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm from his body, and it smelled faintly of old books and something clean, like fresh rain. The gesture was so unexpectedly tender, so protective, that a lump formed in Elara's throat. A fragile connection was being forged between them in the shadows, a quiet understanding that transcended words. In that moment, they were not a CEO and an intern. They were two lonely souls finding a moment of shelter in each other. He didn't know her name. He knew nothing about her. But he knew, with an undeniable certainty that shook him to his core, that he needed to. He felt a purpose stirring within him, a feeling he thought had died forever. He had to protect the pure, unwavering light he saw in her. It was a light that might just be strong enough to lead him out of his own darkness. She was a sign, a miracle, and then the moment was shattered. "I'm sorry, you can't sit here." The voice was sharp, laced with ice and disdain, and it sliced through their quiet bubble. Beatrice Croft stood over them, her perfectly coiffed hair gleaming under the lights. Her lips curled into a sneer of utter contempt as she looked down at Alara. Her eyes swept over Alara's simple dress and the man's worn jacket draped over her shoulders with undisguised disgust. Alara flinched as if struck, color flooding her cheeks. The fragile warmth of the moment vanished, replaced by a biting cold shame. "Miss Vance," Beatrice hissed, her voice low but carrying like a whip crack. "This is the VIP table, reserved for Mr. Sterling's personal guests. What do you think you are doing? You are staff. You are here to work, not to fraternize and embarrass the company." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to inflict maximum humiliation. Alara's heart thudded wildly in her chest, a panicked bird trapped in her ribs. She started to stammer an apology, to explain, but the words caught in her throat. She felt the stares of people at nearby tables, their curious glances turning to pity and amusement. The grand ballroom suddenly felt claustrophobic, the walls closing in. She felt stripped bare, her poverty and insignificance laid out for all to see. It was an unbearable public shaming. Before Julian could react, before the calm, commanding authority that lay dormant within him could rise to her defense, Alara scrambled to her feet. Mortification gave her a surge of adrenaline. She shrugged off his jacket, placing it gently on the chair, her hands trembling. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking, not looking at Julian, unable to meet the eyes of the kind stranger whose jacket she had worn. She couldn't bear for him to witness this. She had to escape. Without another word, she turned and fled, weaving through the glittering crowd, a small, dark figure disappearing into the sea of indifferent faces. She was gone. Julian sat there, stunned into silence. Her abrupt departure left a profound void in her wake. His hand clenched into a fist on the tablecloth. A raw, protective fury rose in him, hot and fierce, an emotion he hadn't felt in a decade. It was directed squarely at Beatrice, whose smug, triumphant expression made his stomach turn. He watched Alara go, his chest tightening with a sense of loss that was shockingly acute. On the floor, half hidden beneath the table where she had been sitting, lay a small, worn object. Her sketchbook. He reached down and picked it up. The cover was simple, frayed at the edges, but the pages inside were filled with breathtaking talent. Sketches of buildings that were not cold or commanding, but warm, organic, and full of light. They were buildings with heart. He knew in that instant, with absolute clarity, what he had to do. This wasn't just about kindness anymore. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the soul of his company, and his own. He would find her. The next morning, the gray light of dawn found Julian Sterling not in his sterile, high-tech office atop the Sterling Tower, but in a dusty, forgotten archive room in the building's basement. The sketchbook lay open before him on a large, wooden table, its pages a testament to a talent so pure it made his chest ache. He had spent the entire night looking through it, each drawing of a sunlit library or a welcoming community shelter, a quiet rebuke to the cold, corporate monoliths his firm now churned out. He had found her name, Alara Vance, inscribed on the inside cover in elegant, shy script. A quick, discreet inquiry with HR had given him the rest of her story. The unpaid internship, the top of her class grades from a state university, and a note about her mother's recent passing. It painted a picture of immense inner strength and quiet, dignified desperation. A plan began to form in his mind, a strategy not of corporate takeover, but of gentle, unseen salvation. He would not simply rescue her. He would lift her up from the shadows without her ever knowing his hand was at work. His first call was to the hospital listed in her file. Posing as an anonymous benefactor from a philanthropic foundation, he settled her mother's entire, crushing medical debt with a single, untraceable wire transfer. He imagined the red-stamped envelopes ceasing their relentless arrival, the profound relief she would feel, and a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. It was the warmth of purpose. A few days later, a crisp, White envelope arrived at Alara's apartment. It contained no letter, only a high-value gift card to a premium grocery store. Alara stared at it, her brows furrowed in confusion. She thought it must be a mistake, a promotional gimmick sent to the wrong address. But when she hesitantly used it, and the cashier told her the balance was enough to feed her for months, tears of disbelief glistened in her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she ate a meal that wasn't cheap leftovers or instant noodles. She felt a sliver of hope, a tiny, golden glow in the vast darkness of her life. She attributed it to a miracle, a random act of grace in a cruel world, never once suspecting it was the calculated, tender intervention of the quiet man from the gala. Back at the office, Julian moved his pieces on the board with quiet precision. He instructed his most trusted deputy, the only person who knew of his personal tragedy and his reclusive habits, to pull Alara from Beatrice's cruel oversight. He had her reassigned to Special Project 34, a dormant file for an old, dilapidated community center in a forgotten neighborhood. It was a project he had started with his wife years ago, a dream they had shared of creating a beautiful, safe space for underprivileged children. After her death, the project had become a monument to his grief, too painful to touch. Now he saw it as a place of rebirth. He sent an anonymous email to Alara from a generic project management account, praising the designs from her sketchbook, which he had discreetly returned to her desk, and formally inviting her to submit a proposal for the community center's restoration. Alara received the email and her heart stopped. Someone had seen her work. Someone had seen her. The praise was so specific, so insightful, it felt as though the author had looked directly into her soul. A wave of cathartic joy washed over her, so potent it left her breathless. The desperation that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a steady, unwavering resolve. She would pour every ounce of her being into this project. It was the chance she had been praying for. She had no idea that her secret admirer, her anonymous savior, was the very man whose passion she had unknowingly reawakened, the CEO who was now watching over her from the shadows, carefully orchestrating her ascent. He was patiently waiting for the right moment to step back into her life. The old community center stood on a quiet, tree-lined street, a forgotten relic of brick and ivy. Sunlight streamed through the dusty, arched windows, illuminating dancing motes of dust in the vast, silent main hall. It was a place of ghosts and memories, but to Alara, it was a canvas of infinite possibility. She had spent 2 weeks working feverishly on her designs, her entire being poured into the blueprints that now covered a makeshift table in the center of the room. This was more than a job. It was a sacred calling. She was so absorbed in her work, tracing a line on the paper with a steady hand, that she didn't hear the soft click of the heavy oak door opening or the quiet footsteps that followed. "Those are remarkable." The voice was low and familiar, a gentle rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. She looked up, her eyes wide. It was him, the kind stranger from the gala, the man with the haunted eyes and the warm jacket. He was standing a few feet away, dressed simply in jeans and a dark sweater, a soft smile on his face. He looked different here, away from the oppressive grandeur of the gala. The deep weariness in his eyes seemed to have lessened, replaced by a quiet intensity as he looked at her drawings. "You," she breathed, a blush rising on her cheeks as the memory of her humiliating exit from the party came rushing back. I'm so sorry about that night." He waved it away with a gentle hand. "Don't be. I should be the one to apologize for what happened." He extended a hand. "I'm Jay," he said, omitting his last name. "I'm a consultant hired by Sterling to oversee this project." It was a plausible lie, one that placed them on equal footing. "Alara," she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm and warm, and it lingered for a moment longer than necessary. Thus began their collaboration. They spent weeks in the dusty, sunlit hall of the old building, a quiet, safe world of their own making. He was not a boss but a partner, listening with unwavering attention as she spoke passionately about her vision for a space filled with light and laughter. He would ask questions that pushed her, that sharpened her ideas, his insight so profound it was as if he understood architecture as well as she did. In their shared quiet, a deep, unspoken bond began to form. One late afternoon, as the setting sun cast a golden glow across the room, they sat on an old wooden bench, sharing a thermos of hot tea Alara had brought. The conversation turned personal. Alara, feeling safe in his steady presence, found herself telling him about her mother. She spoke of her mother's love for community, for gardens, for simple beauty, and how this project felt like building a monument to her memory. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, and she hastily wiped it away. Julian listened, his eyes never leaving her face. He didn't offer empty platitudes or clumsy reassurances. Instead, when she was done, he simply refilled her cup of tea, a small, grounding gesture that said everything. It was an act of being seen, of being understood. Then, in a voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel, he reciprocated. He spoke of his own profound loss, cloaking it in veiled terms. He told her of a dream he had once shared with someone he loved more than life itself, a dream of building things that mattered, and how that dream had died with her. He spoke of the long, hollow years that followed, of living in a world that had lost all its color. As he spoke, Alara saw past the consultant, past the kind stranger, and into the raw, shattered heart of a man drowning in a grief as deep as her own. She saw his unbearable loneliness and recognized it as her own. In that amber hue, surrounded by the ghosts of what was and the promise of what could be, their two broken souls recognized each other. She gently placed her hand on his arm, a simple touch of human connection. "You're not alone, Jay," she whispered. He looked at her, and for the first time, a genuine, unguarded smile touched his lips. The connection was no longer unspoken. It was real, it was undeniable, and it was healing them both. The day of the final presentation arrived like a storm front, the air in the main conference room of Sterling Designs crackling with a nervous, electric energy. The cavernous room was filled with the firm's entire executive board, powerful men and women with polished shoes and impassive faces, alongside a cadre of high-profile clients. Alara stood at the front, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped drum. Her designs for the New Hope Community Center were projected on a massive screen behind her, vibrant and full of life. Julian had given her the confidence to present them herself, assuring her that her passion was her greatest asset. He was sitting at the very back of the room, a quiet, unassuming figure, watching her with steady, encouraging eyes. Alara began to speak, her voice trembling at first, then gaining strength as she described the sunlit reading nooks, the rooftop garden, the accessible art studio. But from the corner of her eye, she saw Beatrice Croft, her face a mask of simmering rage. Beatrice had been seething for weeks, watching the insignificant intern she tried to crush be given a prime project. She would not allow Alara to succeed. She chose her moment perfectly. Just as Alara finished her presentation to a ripple of soft, appreciative murmurs, Beatrice stood up, her sharp movement drawing all eyes. "A very touching story, Miss Vance," she began, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "A truly inspiring tale of pulling oneself up from nothing." The room fell into a tense, sterile silence. "However," Beatrice continued, her voice hardening, "I find the designs themselves a little too familiar. In fact, I find them identical to a proposal submitted by a renowned European firm last year. A proposal that was, of course, confidential." A collective gasp echoed through the room. Alara stared at her, her blood turning to ice. It was a lie, a vicious, baseless accusation. That's not true," Alara stammered, her voice a fragile whisper. She felt dizzy, the faces of the board members blurring into a judgmental collage. Beatrice smiled, a cruel, triumphant smirk. "Is it not? An unpaid intern with no formal experience suddenly produces a portfolio of this caliber? Simply not plausible. She has stolen this work. She is a fraud and a liar, and her presence here is an insult to the integrity of Sterling Designs." Beatrice then delivered the final, devastating blow, her voice filled with theatrical pity. "We can't be surprised. When you come from nothing, I suppose you'll do anything to get ahead. Humiliation, hot and absolute, washed over Alara. She stood frozen, shattered, every eye in the room boring into her, dissecting her, believing the lie. Her dreams, her mother's memory, her one chance. It was all turning to ash. She was alone, defenseless, and utterly destroyed. The silence deepened, becoming unbearable. But then, a new sound broke it. The soft, measured click of footsteps approaching from the back of the room. A calm, commanding presence was moving toward the front. Every head turned. It was the quiet consultant, Jay. He walked with an unhurried grace, his expression unreadable but radiating an immense, controlled power that silenced every unspoken judgment in the room. He came to a stop beside the trembling Alara, placing a gentle, protective hand on her shoulder. The room held its breath. Julian Sterling stood beside Alara, his calm presence a stark contrast to her trembling, fragile state. He looked directly at Beatrice, his eyes, no longer haunted but filled with a cold, clear fire, pinning her in place. The entire room, full of the most powerful people in the industry, seemed to shrink around him, his quiet authority more commanding than any shouted order. "That's enough, Beatrice," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried an undeniable weight that echoed in the sterile silence. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Who was this man to command Beatrice Croft? Beatrice, for her part, looked at him with utter disdain. "And who are you?" she sneered. "Her lowly assistant? Stay out of this." Julian's expression did not change. He simply turned his gaze from her to the assembled board members, many of whom were now shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "For those of you who don't know me," he stated, his voice now resonating with the full force of his identity, "my name is Julian Sterling." A seismic shockwave of gasps and stunned whispers shot through the room. Jaws dropped, eyes widened in disbelief. Beatrice Croft's face went utterly pale, her smug expression dissolving into one of pure, horrified shock. She looked as if she'd seen a ghost. The reclusive, almost mythical CEO, who hadn't been seen at a public company meeting in a decade, was standing right here, dressed in a simple sweater, defending an intern. Julian's protective hand remained on Alara's shoulder, a silent, unwavering anchor. He then began his monologue, his words clear, deliberate, and devastating. "I have been listening from the back of the room not as a consultant, but as the founder of this company. I have listened to Miss Vance present a vision for this firm that I myself thought was lost forever. A vision of architecture with heart, with soul, with humanity." He then turned his chilling gaze back to Beatrice. "And I have also listened to you, Beatrice. I have listened to you attempt to destroy a young woman of immense talent and unimpeachable integrity out of nothing more than petty cruelty and professional jealousy. You speak of integrity? You wouldn't know the meaning of the word." He paused, letting the weight of his condemnation settle. "The accusation of plagiarism is, of course, a lie, a despicable lie. I know this for a fact because I have been personally mentoring Miss Vance on this project for weeks. I have seen her pour her soul onto every page. The only fraud in this room, Beatrice, is you. A person who values status over substance and cruelty over creativity." He then addressed the entire room again, his voice ringing with power. "Let me be perfectly clear. Alara Vance represents the future of Sterling Designs. Her vision is my vision. Her project, the New Hope Community Center, will receive unlimited funding, effective immediately. She will be heading a new division, the Sterling Community Foundation, as its chief architect." He looked down at Alara, whose face was a mask of utter, tear-streaked disbelief. "Her talent is real, her character is pure, and she is under my personal protection." He had not just defended her. He had publicly validated her, elevated her, and utterly reversed the power dynamic, leaving Beatrice speechless and shattered in a single, masterful stroke. He looked back at Beatrice, his voice dropping to a low, final command. "Clear out your desk. You are done." At Sterling Designs. Total silence. The fallout from the presentation was immediate and absolute. Beatrice Croft vanished from the company as if she had never existed, a ghost erased from the corporate ledger. Whispers followed Alara down the gleaming hallways, but they were no longer whispers of pity, but of awe and rampant curiosity. She was the protégée of the Phantom CEO, the girl who had been plucked from obscurity and placed on a throne. It all felt like a bizarre, overwhelming dream. Later that day, she received a summons, a polite, formal email requesting her presence in the CEO's office on the top floor. Her heart thudded with a new kind of anxiety as she rode the private elevator, the silent ascent feeling like a journey to another planet. The doors opened onto a cavernous, minimalist office. It was a space of polished concrete, black leather, and a single immense glass wall that offered a godlike view of the city below. Julian was standing by the window, his back to her, the commanding figure from the boardroom. He turned as she entered, and the power seemed to melt away, leaving only Jay, the kind man from the community center, his eyes filled with a tender, raw emotion. "Alara," he said, his voice soft. "Please come in." She walked hesitantly across the polished floor, stopping a few feet from him. The silence between them was thick with unspoken questions. "Why?" she finally whispered, the single word encompassing everything. "Why did you do all of this? The project, the presentation. Why didn't you tell me who you were?" He walked over to his sleek, empty desk and picked up a familiar object, her worn sketchbook. He held it out to her. "It started with this," he said. "That night at the gala, you didn't just talk about buildings. You talked about the soul of this company, a soul I thought I had buried a long time ago. You reminded me of the man I was supposed to be." He then confessed everything. He told her about his late wife and daughter, the unbearable tragedy that had hollowed him out and driven him into a self-imposed exile of grief. He told her how her simple, selfless act of kindness in offering him a piece of bread had been the first flicker of light in his decade-long darkness. He explained the anonymous help, the debt repayment, the gift card, all his quiet attempts to repay a kindness that had, in truth, been priceless. "I wanted to help you, but I didn't want to frighten you," he explained, his voice laced with vulnerability. "I wanted you to succeed on your own merit, which I knew you would. I just cleared the path a little." He stepped closer, his gaze intense and unwavering. "You didn't just design a building, Alara. You rebuilt me. You walked into the ruins of my life and you started planting a garden." Tears glistened in Alara's eyes. Tears not of sadness or shock, but of profound, cathartic understanding. Every confusing miracle, every moment of unexpected grace, it all clicked into place. It had all been him. "Jay?" she began, the name feeling more real to her than Julian Sterling ever could. He closed the remaining distance between them, gently taking her hands in his. They were warm and steady. "Alara Vance," he said, his voice cracking with the weight of his final confession. "In saving you, I found that I was saving myself. And somewhere along the way, in a dusty community center filled with sunlight, I fell completely in love with you." He had solved all her problems with his power and his wealth, but it was his declaration of love, his raw and open heart, that finally made her feel truly safe. The grand rescue was complete. Her new life was just beginning. 1 year later, the golden afternoon sun streamed through the magnificent glass facade of the completed New Hope Community Center, named in honor of Alara's mother, the Eleanor Vance Center. The air, once thick with dust and ghosts, was now filled with the joyful sounds of children's laughter, the soft strumming of a guitar from the music room, and the quiet murmur of people reading in the sunlit library. It was more than a building. It was a living, breathing heart for the neighborhood, a testament to a dream that had been born in shared grief and brought to life through love. Alara stood on the rooftop garden she had designed, surrounded by blossoming flowers and fragrant herbs, looking down at the thriving scene below. A gentle breeze stirred her hair, and she leaned back into the steady, warm embrace that encircled her. Julian pressed a soft kiss to her temple, his arms wrapped securely around her waist. The haunted look was long gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, abiding peace. He was no longer the Phantom CEO, but the active chairman of the foundation, working by her side every day. The sterile, cavernous mansion he had once rattled around in alone was now for sale. Beside them, resting on a low garden wall, were the blueprints for their future. It was not a grand, commanding palace, but a home, a beautiful, light-filled house with a large garden and a cozy reading nook, sketched with love and precision by Alara herself. Her threadbare coat and the tiny, cold apartment felt like a lifetime ago, a story that had happened to someone else. The suffering had been profound, but the salvation had been absolute. Julian turned her in his arms, his expression full of a love so tender and sincere it still took her breath away. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. She smiled, a radiant, confident expression that was a world away from the shy, uncertain girl from the gala. She reached up and touched the silver locket she still wore around her neck, a symbol not of what she had lost, but of the love that had guided her here. "I was just thinking," she said, her voice clear and strong, "that my mother would have loved this view." They stood together in the golden glow, two souls once shattered by life who had found in each other the missing pieces, forging a future not of polished marble and sterile silence, but of unwavering warmth, profound security, and a pure, undeniable love. This story, at its core, is a timeless fable about the unseen currents that connect us. It is a testament to the idea that a single, selfless act of kindness, offered without any expectation of reward, can set in motion a chain of events so powerful it can heal the most broken of hearts and rewrite the most desperate of destinies. Alara, in her quiet desperation, and Julian, in his gilded prison of grief, were two souls adrift in the world until their paths crossed. Her simple, human gesture was the key that unlocked his heart, and his power became the tool that allowed her pure spirit to flourish. It reminds us that behind every face, whether in a crowded gala or a lonely apartment, there is a story of suffering or of searching, and that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the capacity to see and soothe the pain in another. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of compassion and the possibility of miracles, please let it be a light for you. We live in a world that can often feel transactional and cold, but stories like this exist to remind us of the deep, enduring warmth of the human spirit. Perhaps it made you think of a kindness you once received, or one you might offer. That feeling, that stirring in your soul, is the very essence of what connects us all. It is the hope that even in our darkest hour, a Savior might be sitting right beside us, waiting for a reason to reveal themselves. For more soul-stirring tales of love, redemption, and the incredible power of the human heart, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. Every story is crafted to be a beacon of hope and an inspiring reminder that love is the most powerful